Is Easter a stolen pagan holiday? Let's find out. Hi, and welcome to Tradition and Truth, where we explore theological questions, existential questions. We're going to look into philosophy and various religions in general, including the doctrines, and we're going to have some fun while we do it. Today, we're going to explore this conversation that I've heard, or this meme that resurfaces every year around this time. It's currently March, and April is fast approaching. And if April's fast approaching, that means Easter is almost here. We are in the Lenten season. We're fast approaching the crucifixion and resurrection. We're also near the time of year where you celebrate Passover. And so we really should understand what Easter is, and we need to do that in this video. Who even is Ishtar? Is Ishtar even real? Is there historical documents to talk about Ishtar? Ishtar was a Mesopotamian goddess worshipped in areas that we know today as Iraq and Syria. In ancient times, it would have been known as Assyria and Babylon. That's the historical territories that we can find documents referring to Ishtar from. So who is Ishtar? Well, first we must understand the culture a little bit, and then we're going to dive in. These cultures flourished in ancient Mesopotamia, and they existed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This area is actually referred to as the cradle of civilization. So if this area is where a lot of the Bible is written from, could there be influence? Maybe. Gotta find out. Her mythology prominently features her as a goddess of fertility, sexuality, and war. She is written about in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written about 2100 BC. Ishtar proposes marriage to the hero Gilgamesh, and she was rejected. She sends the bull of heaven as punishment. That does symbolize her dual nature. It represents her passion and destructive tendencies. Another key narrative that's very important is the fact that she descended into the underworld. This would symbolize life and death, and the rebirth cycles associated with fertility. Could Ishtar be associated with the biblical narrative? If Ishtar does sound like Ishtar, and Ishtar is Easter, the two sound very similar, and Ishtar is from Mesopotamia, which is where biblical references account for, to include the book of Genesis and Exodus and the Old Testament. To debunk this, we have to look at the linguistic history or analysis of it, and we should do that now. Ishtar originates from ancient Akkadian cuneiform scripts. Easter, however, does not derive from Mesopotamia or Babylon. It's not even from the Middle East. It's actually a much newer word that was developed in Old English or Anglo-Saxon, which was Easter or Eoster. Eoster is only mentioned like a very select few times, and the only time I can find personally is an 8th century mention by the monk Bede or Bede, B-E-D-E. I'm probably not pronouncing his name correctly. I'm sorry. The Anglo-Saxons named the month April after Eoster, and that was why it was Eoster Manath or Eoster Manath. I'm probably mispronouncing that too. Now, Eoster was associated with spring, and spring is typically associated with fertility and life. And again, I've talked about this in another video, and I'll continue to talk about this when I talk about paganistic religions, but the typical form is that these are developed by tribal nations, and these tribal nations are very much hunter-gatherer, and they need to associate the different seasons of the year to help them live and survive and thrive. So if this is the month of Eoster, one, we can worship her, maybe get better crops, but we also know that we need to plant our crops. We need to get them ready so we can harvest them and have them prepared for the winter months. Because in the spring, the goddess is young and youthful. In the summer, the goddess is fully alive and vibrant and at full energy. The fall is when the goddess starts to die. And during the winter time, the goddess is dead. That's the kind of the cycle you'll see in a lot of these paganistic traditions. Eoster is scarcely documented. There's no significant archaeological evidence that supports any kind of widespread veneration of Eoster. As a matter of fact, Eoster is only mentioned in this one text that I can find, not to say that there wasn't more. It's just, it kind of debunks the idea that one, Easter is associated with Ishtar because it's from a completely different language and it's after a completely different goddess. But also, if this was not a widely respected or worshipped goddess in a religion, then there's not an audience there for the church to conform to to try to draw them into our traditions. And that is one of the myths, is that the church often, and this includes like Christmas and the other holidays as well, but the myth is that the church has taken on these pagan customs or traditions and made them our holidays to help them conform and convert. But the reality is, this has been celebrated since the 1st century AD, and there is plenty of text and documents to talk about Easter or the crucifixion being celebrated during this time, or the resurrection. And this is during a time when Christians were very anti-pagan Rome, and Rome was very open religiously towards many people, but they were very harsh towards Christians. And Christians were not very open. They were, but they weren't. They were very open against Rome, but there was also a ton of martyrdom and death that came to Christians in the earliest centuries, and it's because of their belief system. So they wouldn't have had any kind of authoritative position to push religion into a festival, especially adopting other holidays. Another linguistic aspect that we should really look at is the idea that Easter is not actually what it's called in most of the world. A surprising fact to most people that live here in the USA, in America, is that the rest of the world doesn't speak English. I mean, they do, but it's not the primary language for most of the world. And so the Vatican and many other places in the world call Easter a different name. They call it something similar to Pascha, which is the Hebrew term for Passover. And so Pascua, Pasqua, Pascha, these are all words that are used instead of Easter. It's only in Germany and English or USA that we call it Easter. That being said, I'm not even sure if Germany calls it Easter. That's just what I know off the top of my head. That's not reference. A scholarly reference that I need to input here is by Ronald Hutton, The Stations of the Sun, A History of the Ritual Year in Britain. This was written in 1996. This clarifies that the linguistic connection between Easter and Ishtar is historically unfounded. So if you want a deeper dive into the linguistic representation, please check that book out. Now, I said 1996, and that's way before Facebook or even MySpace, a decade more. So what does this mean? Well, it means the meme is much older than modern day memes in general, which is kind of funny because memes have been around for a long time. But that being said, this meme, or this myth is what it is, has circulated for over 100 years. Who started this, and where did it come from? There's two authors I need to talk about. The first one is Alexander Hislop, and he wrote The Two Babylons in 1853. Now, the 1800s was a period of time of vast Protestant movements, and we're going to talk about that in a different video dealing with the Old West and Protestant movements in the U.S. and how Catholicism was very slow to move here and why that is the case. But for this video, let's just focus on these authors. In The Two Babylons, author Hislop falsely links Catholic rituals to Babylonian pagan practices without any kind of credible evidence. This was debunked by Ralph Woodrow, the author of the Babylon Connection? This was written in 1997, and this book thoroughly debunks all of these crazy theories that Alexander Hislop had. Highly recommend you look into them. There are other authors that wrote books about pagan connections with Catholicism, and I can't list them all here. I don't know how many exactly. I know of like two major ones, and the biggest one is Alexander Hislop. That being said, they were all debunked and widely unaccepted within the community for any theological practice because they were just theories. That's all they were. It was modern day schizo posting, and so it just wasn't accepted. What is the true origin of Easter, and what is the historical context? Historically, Easter links to the Jewish Passover, or Pesach. This commemorates the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt, which is talked about in the book of Exodus. It's when Moses said, "Let my people go," and the Pharaoh suffered greatly, and so did his people. We'll dive into that in another video because there's some really cool historical text that's talked about there. This event was traditionally dated between 1500 to 1300 BC, and the Passover has been celebrated continuously for over 3,000 years. Even in the Catholic Church during the Lenten season, we typically have some sort of meal to discuss the Passover, and the Last Supper was a Passover meal. That's why they had unleavened bread. The date of Easter does align with the lunar-based Jewish calendar, and that commemorates Jesus Christ's crucifixion and resurrection occurring around the Passover. So it's the same time of year the Passover and the crucifixion happened. Again, as I said, Jesus Christ, the Last Supper, his final meals were with unleavened bread because this was during the Passover. Biblical references for this is John 19:14, where John explicitly connects Christ's crucifixion with Passover preparations. And then Luke 22:7 through 20 depicts Christ instituting the Eucharist during the Passover meal. So in conclusion, the claim that Ishtar originates from a pagan practice, Ishtar originates from Easter, and Easter is a pagan practice that was stolen from pagans, it's just historically inaccurate. It's linguistically unfounded, and it's rooted in debunked 19th century authorship that was very anti-Catholic. It was just insane theories. Easter remains rooted in Jewish and early Christian tradition. It commemorates the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it also is in continuity, that's a hard word, of ancient Passover celebrations. If you found this video to be clarifying or helpful, please leave a like. And make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn your notifications on, because I'm going to have a ton of these videos coming out to debunk myths and talk about theology and philosophy and everything in general. Again, this has been Tradition and Truth. My name is Walker. Thank you for watching. God bless and have a great day.